Hi there. Today, I invite you to listen to the story of Les Miserables, written long ago by Victor Hugo. Close your eyes, and let us begin. Back then, France still echoed with the unrest of unfinished revolutions. Outside of Paris, the air might have seemed quiet, like a long-held breath, but beneath it all, the people were fractured. Poverty spread like a shadow, justice was a dream, and the darkness of society loomed heavy and silent. In the south of France, there was a small town called Digne. And in that town, people still told stories of an old bishop whose eyes were as gentle as the late afternoon sun. His name was Charles-François Myriel, though the townspeople called him something warmer, Bishop Bienvenu, which means, quite simply, the kind one. He didn't live in a palace like most bishops. Instead, he chose a modest little house on the edge of town. Every year, the church gave him 15,000 francs, but he kept only a small portion to live simply with his sister and an elderly housekeeper. The rest? He gave it all away. To the sick, the hungry, orphans, the forgotten. He wasn't afraid of anyone, not even those sentenced to death. He visited them in their cells, held their hands, called them my friend, and prayed not for their deaths, but for their peace. Most people didn't quite understand him. Some thought he was mad. Others said he was too good for this world. But deep down, everyone hoped that if they ever fell from grace, they'd meet someone like him. One autumn night, as dry leaves tumbled across the stone roads, a man walked quietly into Digne. He carried a ragged sack on his back and held a yellow piece of paper in his hand, the kind that made people look away. His clothes were rough and dusty. His face was weathered by sun and time. His eyes, part defiant, part afraid. He went from inn to inn, asking for a place to rest. But as soon as they saw that yellow paper, his release passed from prison, they turned him away. Some slammed the doors. Others gave him looks that stung worse than words. His name was Jean Valjean. He had just been released from Toulon prison after 19 years behind bars. Valjean wasn't born a criminal. He once lived with his widowed sister and her 7 hungry children in the village of Favreaux. His parents had died young. He was the only one left to work, chopping wood, hauling carts, doing anything to put food on the table. But that winter was brutal. The wind bit like knives. Snow fell thick. The children cried with hunger. And Valjean, still a decent young man, couldn't take it anymore. One night, he smashed a bakery window and stole a loaf of bread. He was caught. 5 years in prison for a loaf of bread. But he didn't break easily. He tried to escape. They caught him. 3 more years. He tried again. Caught. Another 5. Then 2. Then 3. Until 19 years had passed. Each escape made his sentence longer. Each return made his heart colder. His face grew hard, his spirit locked away. No one remembered his real name anymore. They just called him by a number, 24,601. By the time he was freed, Valjean no longer believed in people. Everyone turned him away. Everyone looked at him with fear or hate. The law had branded him with a piece of paper that killed every hope, a dangerous man. Former convict. He had nothing left. Just 2 rough hands, an empty stomach, and a heart turned to stone. That evening, he knocked on the police station door, asking to sleep in a cell. But they said, "We have no reason to lock you up." So he curled up in a corner of a public garden, planning to sleep under a bench. But an old woman pointed toward the edge of town and said, "Try knocking on the bishop's house. That man, he's not like the others." Valjean didn't believe it, but he had nowhere else to go. The little house had no guards, no locked gate. Valjean knocked. A housekeeper opened the door. Moments later, an old man in simple clothes came out and greeted him with a warm voice. "Good evening, my friend. Please, come in. I'm the bishop of this town." Valjean stammered, I'm a convict. I have nowhere else to go." The bishop smiled. "Well then, this is exactly where you belong." He served Valjean supper, hot soup, white bread, red wine. No questions. No suspicion. Valjean ate like a man who'd survived a storm. But deep inside, He didn't trust it. Couldn't believe kindness like this was real. That night, he was given a clean bed, a lit candle, and a door left open. Valjean lay there, staring at the ceiling. After a while, he got up, walked silently into the dining room. The silver cabinet was still open. The silverware the bishop had used glowed in the candlelight. His hand trembled. Then, like a machine, he swept it all into his sack and disappeared into the dark. The next morning, the police caught him and brought him back to the bishop's house. "This man claims you gave him your silver," they said. The bishop looked at Valjean, his face still closed off, still carrying the weight of sin, and smiled gently. "Ah, yes. But my friend, you forgot the candlesticks. I gave you those too, didn't I?" The officers stared, stunned. But they let Valjean go and walked away. The bishop stepped forward, placed the 2 silver candlesticks in Valjean's hands, and said softly, "Jean Valjean, I have bought your soul from darkness. You no longer belong to evil. Use this silver to become an honest man." As Valjean left that house, his mind reeled. A stranger had saved him, trusted him, called him by his name, not a number. A heart he thought was long dead now trembled with something unfamiliar, mercy. And so, Valjean disappeared from the town. But Jean Valjean, the man who had lived in shadow, was gone. In his place walked someone new, carrying the bishop's candlesticks into the light. Since that day, Jean Valjean was never seen again in the town of D. But a few years later, in a different place called Montreuil-sur-Mer, whispers began to spread about a mysterious man. He had arrived just after a major crisis. The main factory in the region was on the brink of collapse, and hundreds of workers faced unemployment. That man stepped in, bought the factory, expanded it, and created jobs. He was polite, humble, always dressed in plain black, and never claimed to be the owner. People only knew him as Monsieur Madeleine. In just a few years, he transformed Montreuil from a poor town into a thriving one. Before long, nearly the whole population united in asking the authorities to appoint him as mayor. He refused. But after 3 rounds of insistence, he finally accepted. From then on, everyone called him Mayor Madeleine, a kind-hearted man, full of compassion, yet always distant from his own past. He lived alone in a modest house. No wife, no children, no close friends. Just 2 silver candlesticks on the mantel, strange, yet no one dared ask. Under his leadership, the law was strict but never cruel. He helped the poor, opened a hospital, cared for orphans. When an old woman lost her cow, he went out himself to find it. When a crippled soldier had nowhere to stay, he personally brought him to the town's shelter. People respected him, but no one truly understood him. Elsewhere in that town, a woman named Fantine was slipping into darkness. Fantine was young, beautiful, but fate had never been kind. She once loved a wealthy man. They had a daughter together. Her name was Cosette. But the man abandoned them, leaving Fantine alone with a child and not a coin to her name. Unable to care for Cosette, Fantine entrusted her to an innkeeping couple, the Thénardiers, in the village of Montfermeil. They promised to treat the girl like their own. Fantine believed them, and sent money faithfully every month. Then she went to Montreuil in search of work, hiding the fact that she had a child. Fantine found a job in the very factory run by Monsieur Madeleine, a place where workers respected the man in charge so deeply, they barely dared to say his name aloud. She worked hard, but life was never that simple. One day, some women discovered she had a child out of wedlock. They gossiped, mocked, and demanded her dismissal. The factory manager hesitated. But when Inspector Javert, the local policeman, heard about it, he firmly advised they fire her. Javert was a rigid man. He lived and breathed the law. To him, there was no such thing as a mistake worth forgiving. Only right and wrong, black and white, good and evil. And so, Fantine lost her job. No one knew what had happened. Monsieur Madeleine had no idea the girl had been dismissed. Fantine's life began to fall apart. The payments she sent to the inn grew larger, because the Thénardiers kept claiming Cosette was sick, needed clothes, had school fees. In truth, they were pocketing the money for their own children. Fantine took in laundry, then started working in a tavern as a hostess. And when there was nothing left to sell, she sold her hair. When her hair was gone, she sold her 2 front teeth, leaving behind a jagged, broken smile. And when that still wasn't enough to survive, she sold her body. One winter night, a drunken man insulted her on the street. Fantine snapped. She fought back. The police came, and it was Javert himself who threw her in jail. 6 months, he said coldly. Prostitution and public disturbance. Fantine wept. She pleaded, I have a little girl. Please, I'm begging you. Javert was unmoved. But then, Monsieur Madeleine arrived. He had heard what happened, came to the station, and when he saw the hollow face, the uneven hair, the mouth missing 2 teeth, he understood immediately. This was not a wicked person. This was someone crushed by life. He demanded she be released. I can't, Javert objected. She broke the law. Then the law is wrong, Madeleine said. She was forced to live this way because of us. Javert was furious, but he had no choice. He was under orders. Madeleine took Fantine to the hospital. He didn't judge her. He simply said, rest. When you're better, I'll bring Cosette back to you. Fantine looked at him as if she were looking at a saint. She had no idea he had once been a convict, and no idea that his past was quietly catching up to him. A few days later, news stirred the town. A man had been arrested in Arras, accused of being the escaped convict Jean Valjean. And the person who reported it was none other than Javert. Javert came to see Monsieur Madeleine, his eyes downcast, his voice uneasy. Sir, he said, I once suspected you were Jean Valjean. But now, I see I was wrong. Because the real Valjean has been captured. I beg you to punish me for the false accusation. Madeleine froze. Jean Valjean was him. The man now in prison was innocent. He simply resembled Valjean, had wandered through life the way Valjean once had. That night, he didn't sleep. On the table beside him were the bishop's 2 silver candlesticks. He thought, if I stay silent, I can keep my peace. Remain the mayor. Stay Madeleine. A good man. But if I stay silent, an innocent man will be condemned. Fantine will never see her daughter again. And the promise I made to the bishop would become a lie. So he rose. Quietly. Alone. The next morning, at the courthouse in Arras, the trial was reaching its end. The accused stood ready to hear his sentence when a stranger entered the courtroom. Wait, the man said calmly. This is not Jean Valjean. Then who are you? The judge asked. The stranger looked around the silent room. His voice was steady. I am Jean Valjean. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. No one believed it at first. But then he began to speak, names, dates, details only the real Valjean could know. He named the prison guards. He recalled the exact number, 24,601. He described his escape attempts, the punishments, the years. Then he turned, walked over to the accused, placed a hand gently on his shoulder, and said, You're a free man. And with that, he walked away. Not running. Not hiding. Simply ready to face the truth. Back in Montreuil, he went straight to the hospital. Fantine was dying, her body worn down by the cold, the hunger, the years of misery. She looked up, barely able to speak. Where's Cosette? He held her hand tightly. I'll find her. I promise. Fantine gave a faint smile. Then her eyes closed, softly, like a leaf falling at the end of autumn. Fantine was gone. Jean Valjean, no longer the mayor, no longer Monsieur Madeleine, stood beside her bed. This woman had lived through a lifetime of sorrow, but in her final moment, she had managed to believe in something kind. He stood there for a long time. Then he stepped out of the hospital, where whispers had already begun to spread. The mayor was once a convict. He didn't look back, because now there was only one thing he had to do, find Cosette. And so he went, quietly, down muddy roads, through dark forests, past fog-drenched villages. The little girl Fantine had spoken of, with eyes fading like the last glow of evening, where was she now? How many days had passed since someone last said her name with kindness? He reached Montfermeil on a bleak afternoon at the year's end. The sky was gray, the wind howled through bare branches, scraping over the frozen earth. Valjean stopped in front of a worn-down inn called the Red Mark, the very place Fantine had once entrusted her child. He didn't go in. He stood across the road, watching. And there, amid the laughter and clamor of guests, he saw a small figure weaving between tables, carrying plates, wiping the floor. Her dress was patched in a dozen places. Her hair was tangled. Her eyes hollow and tired. He knew instantly this was Cosette. That night was Christmas Eve. There was a feast. A worn violin played a thin tune. Laughter, footsteps, the clink of glasses filled the air. Valjean sat alone at the back table. He didn't eat. He didn't speak. He simply watched, in silence. After a while, Thénardier called out, "Cosette, where's the water?" The little girl jumped, nodded, grabbed a heavy bucket and stumbled out the door. The wind slammed into her. It was bitterly cold. Cosette walked to the well, far from the inn. Her hands shook, from cold, from hunger. The bucket was nearly as heavy as her. She didn't complain. She didn't cry. She just clutched her thin fingers tighter around the handle. Then, a shadow stepped beside her. "Getting water, are you?" The voice was deep, warm, not sharp and harsh like most grown-ups she knew. Cosette froze, then nodded. "They send you out at this hour?" I get in trouble if I don't go." The man looked at the bucket, then gently said, "Let me carry that." Valjean took the bucket from her. All the way back, she said nothing. But somehow, the frozen air didn't feel quite so cruel, because someone was walking beside her. The next day, Valjean passed by a toy shop. In the window sat a porcelain doll in a blue lace dress, eyes wide and dreamy. Every child who walked by paused to look. Valjean bought it. Without hesitation. He returned to the inn, knelt down, and handed it to Cosette. "This is for you." She stared, eyes wide, then stepped back in fright. I can't take it. I'm not a rich girl." Valjean sat down, voice soft. "No one ever said you didn't deserve it." She reached out, gently held the doll. Her cheeks flushed, not from cold, but because it was the first gift anyone had ever given her. After the meal, Valjean asked to speak with Thénardier. "I'd like to take the girl," he said. Thénardier chuckled dryly. "Well, it's not so simple. We've raised her since she was little. We're quite attached." Valjean quietly set a pouch of gold on the table. Thénardier's smile vanished. His eyes lit up. "Well, we certainly wouldn't stand in the way of her future. Of course. Raising a child all these years, it does cost a fair bit." Valjean said nothing. He just placed a second pouch of gold beside the first. Thénardier swallowed. Then, "May you both live happily ever after." And with that, he hurried Cosette to the door. Cosette took Valjean's hand as they walked away. At first, she hesitated, glancing back. But his hand gave hers a gentle squeeze, steady, warm, and kind. She didn't look back again. From that day on, Cosette had a father. Not by blood, but the first person whose touch didn't make her flinch. Valjean brought Cosette to Paris. They lived quietly, in a small hidden home. Each day, he taught her letters, numbers, and stories. He bought her warm clothes, sturdy shoes, even a picture book with watercolor flowers. She grew, and so did her smile. But darkness doesn't sleep. Javert, the inspector as rigid as iron, had traced their trail. One night, the police stormed in. Valjean heard the footsteps and knew their time was up. He picked Cosette up. She didn't cry. She trusted him. They fled. Through alleys black as wells. Past overgrown graveyards where weeds rose like ghosts. And finally, they reached a rusted iron gate. Beyond it lay an old convent. Valjean knocked. A familiar face answered, Monsieur Fauchelevent, the old man Valjean had once saved from a falling cart. Fauchelevent didn't ask. He simply said, "Come in." From then on, Valjean became the convent's gardener. Cosette studied with the nuns. They lived in quiet, like two leaves fallen into a forgotten forest. But they were no longer alone. Years passed. Cosette bloomed like a wildflower, not showy, but pure. Her voice was gentle. Her eyes carried the soft sorrow of someone who had known hardship too young. And whenever Valjean looked at her, something inside him softened. The convent was the most peaceful place they'd ever known. Each morning, Valjean raked the earth, watered the roses. Each night, he read stories to her. On cold nights, Cosette would carry her blanket into his room and fall asleep by the fire. Once, she asked, "Papa, am I really your daughter?" Valjean looked at her. Didn't answer right away. Then said softly, "No. But I think. That doesn't matter. Because I love you as if you were everything I have." Cosette nodded. She never asked again. Valjean knew the light the bishop had once placed in his hands, those two silver candlesticks, had now taken shape in this child. A girl once tossed aside by the world, just like he had been. But now quietly warming the heart he thought had died long ago. He had once been 24,601. A fugitive. A man who trusted no one. But from the night he held that little hand in the Christmas snow, he never walked alone again. 10 years passed. Paris had changed. People had changed too. The convent was now just a memory. Jean Valjean and Cosette had left, not because they were discovered, not because they were fleeing, but simply because Cosette had grown up. They moved into a small house on a quiet street, its front covered in ivy. Cosette was now a young woman, graceful, soft-voiced, her long hair catching the light. She was well-mannered, but she dreamed. Obedient, but thoughtful. Jean Valjean never lied to her. But there was one truth he always kept hidden, his past. To Cosette, he was the gentle father, with sad eyes and rough hands that always held hers when they crossed the street. And she never asked. Every morning, Valjean took Cosette for walks in the Luxembourg gardens. They sat on the same bench beneath the old elms, watching the leaves fall, listening to the birds. He read. She embroidered. Sometimes, they said nothing for hours, and it never felt strange. Then, one morning, a young man appeared. Marius. A quiet young man in a warm brown coat, who sat on the bench across from Cosette, just far enough to seem casual, just close enough to see the light in her eyes. Day after day, he came. Same time. Same seat. Never spoke. At first, Valjean didn't notice. But Cosette did. She still pretended to sew, but her needle missed the thread. She still listened to her father's reading, but couldn't recall the words. And then one morning, while Valjean was speaking, she asked offhandedly, "Papa, don't you think it's colder today than yesterday?" "Perhaps," he replied. But he understood. That wasn't a question about the weather. Marius noticed too. He learned her name, Cosette. He didn't know who she was, or where she came from. But he knew he loved her, ever since that first glance when she looked up from her embroidery and smiled, just barely. He wanted to speak, but never dared. Valjean, on the other hand, began to worry. He saw the way the young man looked at her, honest, but full of longing. He saw Cosette change, her dreams restless, her laughter softer, her gaze always distant. One evening, he said, "Let's walk in a different park, shall we?" Cosette didn't protest. But from that day on, Marius never saw her again. He searched. All over Paris. He asked questions, checked registries, looked up addresses with the name Cosette. No luck. He grew thin, tired. But he never stopped looking. Meanwhile, Valjean began living as he had in the past, quietly, cautiously, avoiding attention. Cosette didn't know. But he felt it, his time with her was thinning. Like morning mist. Then fate knocked again, this time not with warrants or whispers, but with the crack of gunfire and the smell of powder in the air. In June of that year, Paris rose in revolt. Young men. The poor. The forgotten. They built barricades. They called it a revolution. And among them was Marius. He wasn't a zealot. But he believed in justice. He believed in beauty. He believed that from fire and chaos, a fairer France could be born. One night, Valjean heard Cosette weeping in her room. He knocked. She didn't answer at first, then murmured, "I dreamed. Someone was falling, covered in blood. I don't know who. But my heart. It hurt so much." Valjean understood. She hadn't forgotten the young man from the garden, the nameless boy they used to see every morning. He stood outside on the porch for a long while, then put on his coat, his hat, and walked straight into the uprising. He didn't carry a weapon. He only wanted to find Marius, the boy he had never spoken to, but somehow knew, if Cosette loved him, then he must survive. Through fire, smoke, and shouting, Valjean moved forward. Javert was there too, captured by the rebels. They meant to execute him, the symbol of authority. But Valjean asked to guard him, and later, let him go in secret. Javert stared at Valjean, bewildered. A convict sparing the man who had hunted him for years. Was it mercy? Duty? Or freedom? Then Valjean found Marius. He was gravely wounded, left for dead among the fallen. Valjean lifted him onto his back, carried him through the Paris sewers, step by step, bearing on his shoulders the young man, whom the girl he loved. They survived. Marius was saved. He never knew who rescued him. He didn't know the man who carried him from hell was Jean Valjean. Cosette was overjoyed. They reunited without questions. They fell in love. Valjean stood aside, quietly, like a painter finishing a masterpiece. Then stepping into shadow. He didn't interrupt. He didn't object. He said nothing at all. On the day Marius proposed to Cosette, Valjean smiled. He didn't ask where the young man was from, or who he was. He already knew. The only thing he did was take Marius on a walk through Paris, and gently told him the whole truth. He was Jean Valjean. He had once been a convict. He had been hunted. And he had carried Marius out of the fire. Marius stood speechless. He was grateful. But deep down, there was hesitation, as with many who had grown up trusting the rules of society. And Valjean understood. After the wedding, Valjean slowly began to step away. He stopped visiting often. He gave no reason. Only said, "I'm busy." Cosette didn't understand. But she didn't press. She was living in her first spring. Her heart was just beginning to bloom. In a small room, Jean Valjean faded. Not from age, but from remembering. He remembered Cosette's eyes when she was a child, when he held her hand walking through snow-covered streets. He remembered the first time she called him Papa. He remembered mornings at the convent, when she embroidered flowers, and he read aloud. And all of that now lived only in silence. Jean Valjean never left Paris. But he disappeared from Cosette's life. After her wedding, he quietly moved into a small room, damp, bare, with only a wooden bed, a worn bench, an old cabinet, and on the shelf, 2 silver candlesticks. He wasn't sad. But inside, something grew emptier each day. Cosette didn't understand. From the time she was little, her father had never left her. And now, he avoided her. He didn't visit. He didn't write. Not even a word. She asked Marius. He said gently, "Maybe. He thinks we have our own life now." Cosette said nothing. But every night, she sat by the window, looked at the sky, and silently wondered, "Papa, where are you? Are you okay?" Valjean was not okay. He grew weaker. Not from illness, but from having no one left to live for. Cosette had someone now. Someone to care for her. Valjean knew that. He accepted it. But like all those who've loved too deeply, he didn't know how to live when that love had nowhere left to go. One day, by chance, Marius met the old man Fauchelevent, once a gardener in the convent, once saved by Valjean. And from him, Marius heard the whole truth, that Valjean had saved his life during the uprising, that he raised Cosette from childhood, that he had once been a mayor, that he had been hunted all his life, yet had never done evil. Marius was filled with remorse. He rushed back to Cosette. They searched for Valjean's old address, asked around, knocked on doors. Finally, a gatekeeper said, "There was an old man here once. Thin. Quiet. Always carried a little cloth bag. Probably dying now, in the last room down the hall. They ran. The room was dim. No candles. No lamp. Only the faint light slipping through a narrow window. Jean Valjean lay on the bed. His skin wrinkled, his eyes sunken, his hands frail. But when he saw Cosette, he smiled, like a child hearing their name called in love. "Papa, why did you leave me?" Cosette whispered, choking back tears. Valjean's voice was barely there, like he feared the wind might carry it away. "You have your happiness now. I didn't want to be in the way. Knowing you smile each day is enough." Marius stepped forward. He knelt. "Sir, please forgive me. I didn't know. I once doubted someone more noble than anyone I've ever met." Valjean shook his head. "It's all right. Young man, that's only human. And you've given Cosette a good life. I thank you for that." The room was quiet. Evening light spilled across the floor. Outside, the church bells rang. Valjean looked at Cosette, then pointed to the shelf in the corner, the one holding the two old, dust-covered silver candlesticks. He said softly, "My child, did you know? Once I was filled with hatred, but one man gave me light, with his hands, with his faith, and with these two candles. I never understood why he forgave me, why he believed in me. But from that moment, I knew, no one is ever too far gone to be saved." Cosette held his hand tight. "You were never bad, Papa. I never believed that." Valjean closed his eyes. He smiled. "I'm glad. You've grown. You've loved. You've lived the life you deserve." He paused. His breath slowed. "And I don't regret a thing, because I got to love you." Outside the window, the sunset moved slowly. The wind stirred the ivy leaves on the old brick wall. Valjean held Cosette's hand one last time. His face grew still, peaceful, like someone falling into a sleep without dreams. No one cried loudly. No one screamed. There was only light, warm and gentle, spilling over two hands still clasped together. The same hand that once led a little girl through the cold, now quietly let go, closing the final chapter. On his grave, Cosette and Marius didn't carve a name. Only this, the man who carried two silver candlesticks. The one who lived by the light he was given, and left that light behind for others. Thank you for listening. May your heart be light and your sleep be deep. Good night.